We are going to show you the secrets of building muscle. Now remember, you don't control growth. What you do control are the 8 stress factors that will provide the environment for growth.
The Titan training system is going to take your physiology to its ultimate destination.
It's hard to know what your genetic potential is until you reach it. Most often, it becomes an excuse. Our goal with Titan Training System is to show you how to reach MPR, maximum physiological rate.
If you're training for multiple goals, size, strength, muscular endurance, definition, explosive power for sports, and you're training all at the same time, you're really compromising your adaptive reserve. Burn into your mind the phrase, the body becomes its function. What that means is focus on one goal at a time. Bodybuilding is really a simple formula. We have spent over 25 years researching, experimenting, and training, trying to find the most effective and efficient way of packing on muscle as fast as possible. First, let's dispel the myth about the hard gainer.
There are no hard gainers. Hard gainers are as rare as a white bison. What you need is a better map. You need a better plan to your destination. The Titan Training System is your map for ultimate growth.
Stress plus recovery equals adaptation. Let me elaborate. Let's take a callus, for example. When there's friction on your hands, which is stress, the body reacts to that by adapting, thickening the skin, creating a callus. That's adaptation. Now, if you don't apply enough stress, then you're not going to get a callus formation. If you apply too much stress, the recovery, remember, stress plus recovery, the recovery isn't adequate, and you actually cause skin damage, called a blister. Now, in bodybuilding, it's a little bit more complicated than that because we're dealing with 8 stress factors. And you control the 8 stress factors that become almost the music to creating muscle. They're the keys to the piano.
If bodybuilding is so simple, why does it seem so hard to build muscle?
The honest answer, it's the industry's fault. You see, magazines have to sell 12 issues a year, and they've got to fill it with editorial. So every month, there's a new plan, a new strategy. How many ultimate arm building programs can there be? How many ultimate thigh building or calf building or chest? You see, they've got to fill space. So it's to their advantage to confuse the issue. There's no overt plan to do this. It's just that every month, deadlines hit, new stuff has to come out. What you need is a strategy, a consistent strategy, the correct strategy for building muscle quickly.
Think of getting a cup of adaptive energy every single day. You can use it for whatever purpose you want. The Titan Training System will show you how to use that adaptive energy for maximum muscle growth.
One of the surprising things that came out of the research when developing the Titan Training System, and this is going to sound like we're contradicting what we just said, is that while you are focusing on developing muscle size, the Titan Training System allows you to gain a tremendous amount of strength at the same time. So it's kind of like you have your cake and eat it too. This was not the intent of the system, but we find that the strength gains increase almost in proportion to the size gains. This is the first time that's ever happened.
Soreness should never be feared. In fact, expect it. That dull ache that you get in those muscles, that's nothing more than lactic acid buildup. Don't ever let that prevent you from working that muscle again.
Now remember, soreness is not a gauge for recovery or lack of recovery. But let's qualify that. We're not saying the old no pain, no gain. There's a difference between an injury, a shearing pain of a muscle tear or a ligament tear, and the general soreness, muscle soreness that you feel just from a workout. So you're going to have to kind of keep that balance. Don't train through muscle injury soreness. That takes recovery. You need to see your physician or whatever you need to do on that. We're talking about that kind of dull ache that you get from an extended workout where there's lactic acid buildup. Before we explain the Titan training system, it is important to understand the 8 training stress factors that are involved in building muscle.
Stress factor number 1, training session length. This is extremely important. One of the things that I learned over in Eastern Europe was not to stay in the gym or train past 55 minutes. The reason for that is that your hormone profile will change. In other words, if you go past the 55-minute mark, you're going to start getting into overtraining. The idea here is to train smart and not necessarily train too long. And again, keep in mind what we talked about before about the callus. We want a callus and not a blister. That's part of the adaptation.
This is where we see bodybuilders blow it most often. They don't finish their workout in 55 minutes, so they go 60 minutes, 65 minutes. Pretty soon it's an hour and 15 minutes. Remember, it's the quality of the workout, not the quantity. In fact, if you go past 55, you're going to be undoing things that you did in the first 55 minutes. So the rule is, no matter if your workout is done or not, in 55 minutes, you walk out of the gym. It's almost kind of a self-discipline or self-punishment. If you weren't focused enough, if you didn't have enough mental intensity and focus to get through the workout properly in the prescribed time, then you're not going to be able to complete the workout. Next time, you'll stay more focused, you'll be on track, and get the job done. Stress factor number 2, training session frequency. How often should you train in a week period? Now, this answer is going to be less cut and dry than stress factor 1, where we give you an absolute 55-minute maximum amount of time that you're going to spend in the gym. How often you train per week is going to be dependent on the style and type of training you're doing. An example, high intensity, low volume training, the recovery is much faster and you can train more often. The Bulgarians were able to train 6 times a day, 6 to 7 days a week, because their intensity was very high, the volume was very low, and they were able to recover quickly within hours from one session to the other. Now let's take the other extreme. Let's take a triathlete or a cyclist or a marathon runner. Their training sessions typically are extremely high volume. They cannot train as often because high volume, low intensity training taps into the energy reserves, the adaptive reserves, much more deeply than high intensity, low volume training, meaning that the recovery time is much longer. So getting back to bodybuilding, our original program years ago, the Bulgarian Burst System, we had bodybuilders training 3 times a day, 6 days a week. The style of training was much higher intensity, lower volume. They were able to recover and adapt from one workout to the next. The system now has evolved to now where a bodybuilder on the Titan system is training 4 days a week. That's it. That's all that's required. The results are going to be much, much greater than we've had in the past with other systems. The Titan training system, even though you're only training 4 days a week, is not a compromise. It was not designed so that it would be more convenient for the person, since they're only training 55 minutes at a time, 4 days a week. It just happened to end up that way. We were able to combine volume and intensity into a single workout, which, even though the adaptive reserves requiring more rest, but rest assured, the growth that you are going to achieve, and as a byproduct, the strength you're going to achieve, is much greater than we had ever anticipated. This is not a compromise. This is the best system for developing muscle mass.
Stress factor number 3, body part training frequency. How often should you train each body part? Traditionally, experts have prescribed training 3 times a week would improve muscle definition. Training twice a week would improve muscle size. Let me clarify. Each body part needs to be trained 3 times per week.
Now, if you're training correctly, if you're training what we call in a full spectrum method, then 3 times a week on each body part is the ideal. If you're training incorrectly, 3 times may be too much. But again, we're after maximum growth. Maximum growth requires stimulation of the muscle, and when I mean stimulation, I mean stress, 3 times a week. Stress factor number 4, exercise selection and performance. Now this is a huge area, and let's first briefly discuss exercise selection, and I'm going to get into more detail on that later in the program. We have developed what we feel is a revolutionary method of looking at any exercise and being able to gauge its overall effectiveness for building muscle mass and strength. But that's going to require some time to go through, so I just want to briefly tell you now that there is a method to evaluate exercises for their effectiveness. Let's talk more right now about exercise performance, how an exercise is done. We're going to use Leo as an example to show you what Leo likes to term the life of a set. Is that going to be too much weight for you, Leo?
Yeah, can you spot me?
Now he's going to start a barbell curl. Notice he keeps a good pace and rhythm. His form is tight. There's no bouncing. The target muscle that is being hit is the biceps. Now, over time, as he starts fatiguing, he's going to loosen his form up a little bit. We're not cheating, we're just loosening it up. Now he's using a little bit of his upper body, he's bouncing off his legs. He's doing this to keep the stress in the muscle. Now, what happens if he starts loosening up too much? Okay, now he's taking stress off of the muscle and he's focusing on just getting the weight up. This is called poor form or sloppy form. This is not what you want. This is not achieving anything unless maybe you were an Olympic lifter. We want to keep the stress on the muscle, so this is what you want to do. You want to start off tight, good rhythm, good pace. As the weight starts getting heavier, you can loosen up your form. This is the life of a set.
Stress factor number 5, repetition speed. How fast should you do a repetition? The body is built for speed. The faster that you can do a repetition without momentum taking over, the more contraction you'll get to the muscle. Think of your repetition as a dance. The dance changes. Sometimes your pace will be a little bit slower, not slow, but just a little bit slower. Sometimes you're going to pick up pace and your speed will increase. As long as you don't have momentum taking over, you'll get maximum contraction to the muscle.
Stress factor number 6, volume and intensity. Now earlier, we talked about training intensity and training volume. And when we talk about volume and intensity, we mean very specific things. Typically, the word intensity, when it applies to weightlifting or more likely bodybuilding, is misused. Most people think of training intensity as training really hard with a lot of effort. I train intensely. Well, that's not the correct use of the term. Training intensity is the average weight lifted in a workout. Training volume is the weight times the reps in a workout. And it gives you a very specific number. You take that total workload or amount, weight times reps of the entire workout, you divide it by the total number of reps, and now you have average intensity. Now these have a lot of meaning. Typically your power lifters and your Olympic lifters work a lot with this, and they call it workload. They look at their average weight lifted and the total volume that they use. When we look at training in intensity, for bodybuilding purposes, we know that a muscle to grow at a maximum rate requires both volume and intensity, and yet they're mutually opposed. When you increase intensity, you decrease volume, and vice versa. So the first major discovery in how to kind of combine the two was developed by the Russians years ago. They called it periodization. That's where you train intensely for part of the year, and you train more volume another part of the year. And there's a little bit more to it, but that's basically the underlying premise of it. And now you're getting both volume and intensity over a year period. The Bulgarians took that a step further, and they called it micro-periodization, where they periodized or combined volume and intensity in a 1 week period. That's what we have utilized in all our training programs. There's many benefits to that. Namely, the body responds better when you condense the periodization, when you mix up volume and intensity in a very short time schedule or time frame. The results are better, the recovery is better, and actually you stay more in condition all year round. Stress factor number 7, weight and repetition. How much weight should you use? How many repetitions should you do? Now, weight and repetition is really a cousin to volume and intensity. Intensity being the weight and volume being the reps. As opposed to talking about the entire workout, now we're just talking about the individual set.
Keep in mind when you're doing Titan training, which part of the program that you're at, whether if it's base training or the muscle rounds. Each section has a list of how many repetitions that you should be using. In the beginning, you may not know exactly how much weight to use. You're going to pick a weight. Let the repetitions determine how much weight that you actually use. And then again, keep in mind where you're at in the training program. As you become more accustomed, your body will adapt, and then you'll know which weight to actually start with.
Please understand, there is no set repetition and weight scheme for building muscle. It's a full spectrum process. You have periods of time when you're going to be using lower weight and higher reps, and vice versa. These are the keys to the piano, so to speak. You can't play a song with just one key. You need several keys. You can't build muscle sticking to one set and rep scheme. So people that talk about training with heavy weight, low reps, and that's the secret to developing muscle mass, well, they're going to get initial results, but they're not playing the whole song. They're going to hit a plateau very, very quickly. And also with people that tend to use high reps, lower weight, same difference. The secret to not hitting a plateau and continuing muscle gain in a strategically planned program is to vary weight and rep over the entire workout. This has all been done for you in the Titan training system.
Stress factor number 8, rest intervals between sets. How long do I rest from one set to the other? This is not a simple answer. In fact, often ignored, and yet it's the most vital component of the 8 stress factors.
When picking a rest time between each set, you are actually determining which energy system you are going to be predominantly using. Now, basically, we have 3 energy systems that we use in everyday life. You have the ATP-PC, you have the lactic acid, and you have the aerobic. Most people are very familiar with the aerobic. ATP-PC is a very powerful energy system, but it's depleted quickly. So when you use high-intensity training with long rest periods, you're basically taxing the ATP-PC. Now, the other energy systems are going to be involved in it, but that's going to be the predominant focus. When you decrease the rest time and you typically decrease the intensity, namely weight, you're going to be kicking in more of the lactic acid system. Again, most of the time when people are training, they feel that lactic acid burn. They are deriving energy predominantly from the lactic acid system. When you lower the intensity even more, where you're using a much lighter weight and are cutting the rest times down tremendously, where you're huffing and puffing, you're really kicking in the aerobic system. And again, in all of these training examples, you're using all 3 systems simultaneously. It just depends on what you're focused. Now, remember we mentioned before about full spectrum training, that to get maximum muscle size, the muscle has to be stimulated in a full spectrum manner. That means you need to be attacking all 3 energy systems. Bottom line is, you need to be using a full spectrum of weight, full spectrum of repetitions, and a full spectrum of rest periods. This is going to achieve maximum muscle growth.
Now we've covered the 8 stress factors. The good news is you don't have to memorize this stuff. It's all incorporated in the Titan training system.
We really just covered the 8 stress factors so that you would have a basic understanding of why we're doing what we're doing, and to some extent, how. But depending on the goal, those 8 stress factors will change. But the 8 stress factors are always there and always need to be considered. When we're designing a system for an athlete, or in some cases we design a system for a group of Navy SEAL team members, the stress factors are all the same. We just manipulate them in such a way so that their goal would be achieved, their objective would be achieved. In this case, the goal is maximum muscle growth. Now, earlier we talked about the concept of MPR, maximum physiological rate. This is the nirvana of bodybuilding. This is the ultimate goal. Maximum physiological rate is a concept. It's a concept that states that there is a maximum rate of muscle growth for any given individual. And if you manipulate the 8 stress factors correctly, you're going to achieve that. And for most instances, the MPR is much, much greater than how people are typically training. A person can typically reach their genetic potential in 3 to 5 years. The problem is people focus so much on genetic potential, thinking it's almost like a buzzword. You know, I want to reach my genetic potential. The downside to that is you don't know where your genetic potential is. You don't know where your limits are, and you won't know until after you've gotten there. So we focus on MPR, and we believe the Titan's training system has come in closest to achieving MPR over anything that has ever been designed, including our own programs in the past.
Titan training system is a 12-week cycle. Let's overview it first, and then we'll break it down into its component parts.
Now, the first 8 weeks of the 12-week cycle, you will be doing the Titan training system. After those 8 weeks, you will switch over to a planned specialization program for 3 weeks. After that, you will do 1 week of rest. Then you will start the whole process over again. Now, we like to refer to this almost like a spiral staircase, because even though you're going to begin the whole process over again every 12 weeks, you're going to be ending up at a higher level than you were before. Now, the Titan training system itself can be broken into 3 components: base training, volume training, and muscle rounds. Let's first begin with base training. Base training creates a foundation of strength for your muscle. Base training is really a slight modification to pyramid training. And many of you know what pyramid training is, but for those of you that don't, let me go through it. Pyramid training is where you pick a weight and you do so many repetitions. Then the next set, you add weight and you do fewer repetitions. The next set, you add more weight, fewer repetitions. So you're progressively adding more weight and doing fewer repetitions, thus creating a kind of pyramid. Now, pyramid training in the past has been, and still is, considered the most effective way to put on strength. We have created a modification to pyramid training that amplifies its results to an incredible degree. We call it base training. Now, here's the twist that we do with base training. Most of the time, when a person is engaged in pyramid training, they are focused at the top of the pyramid, not the bottom. So they start out with a certain weight. Let's say in bench press, they start with 135 pounds, and they'll do 15 repetitions or 12 repetitions. They'll add a couple quarters, do another set with fewer repetitions, maybe 8, add a little bit more weight, do 6, so on and so forth, until they reach their peak, which may be 250, 275. You have another individual who's bench pressing 450 pounds. He still starts with 135 pounds or 2 large plates on the end of the bar, and then he pyramids up. Now, his pyramid is much steeper as he goes up because he's making bigger jumps in weight. We looked at that and we thought, what would happen if we just kind of let go of focusing on the top of the pyramid, the end result. And we focus on the base. Because you see, when you start off with your first set, you typically can always increase your first set a little bit. Not always can you increase the very top set. Some weeks you're stronger than others. So in practicality, what that means is we focus on always increasing the base of the pyramid and let the top take care of itself. So the first time you do pyramid training, you start off with 135 as your base weight for bench press. Next week, maybe you'll try 140 or 145 as your first weight, and then so on and so forth. Now, what's the end result of training in this manner? Well, we have dozens and dozens of clients that have been working with base training, and their base weight for the bench press is just phenomenal. They'll go into a gym and their base weight is 395 pounds or 315 pounds. That's their starting weight. Now what happens is, remember before we said the body becomes its function? What we mean by that is how you train your body, that's how it's going to become. Their body is so used to using heavy weight that eventually it seems light to them. And by focusing on the base, you can get much more consistency in your strength gains. Because again, some days you're not going to peak like other days. And there's just, there's too many factors involved with physiology. So we focus on the base, and that's what we call it, base training.
The next component is volume training. Volume training generates muscular endurance. This is also known as a form of active recovery. The emphasis here is to do more repetitions or more work with a little lighter weight. After doing volume training for a period of time, this will set you up for the next stage, which is called muscle round.
What happens with muscle rounds is we've done what we think, or used to think was impossible to do. We've actually been able to merge volume and intensity. Remember we talked about before that volume and intensity are mutually exclusive. In other words, when you raise volume, you have to lower intensity, and when you raise intensity, you got to lower volume. And the problem is for muscles to grow, which is really an unnatural process. The body resists hypertrophy or muscle growth because it's not a very good survival characteristic from an evolutionary point of view. You have to actually somehow marry volume and intensity. And that's done, again, in the past we've talked about with microperiodization and periodization. But the more you can condense and put those two things together in a shorter period of time, the better the results are. Well, muscle rounds meshes volume and intensity in the same set. And here's how it goes. You pick a weight that you typically can get 8 to 10 repetitions with. You only do 4 repetitions with that weight, and then you rest for 10 seconds. Then you do another 4 reps, and then you rest another 10 seconds. Every time you do 4 reps and rest 10 seconds, that is called a muscle round. And you will typically do 5 to 6 rounds of that per exercise. Now, what is accomplished by this? Well, we've kind of created a hyper blend of sets and rest periods, because it's not a true rest period in the sense of 30-second, 45-second, 2-minute, 3-minute. But the 10 seconds is enough to get a significant amount of lactic acid clearance out of your system and let the nervous system kind of recharge or regain so that you can continue on with more reps with that same amount of weight. What happens typically in a set, the exhaustion doesn't come from just muscle exhaustion. The exhaustion and why you can't continue that set usually comes from lactic acid buildup and metabolite buildup. 10 seconds allows that to flush so you can do 4 more reps. Now this sneaks up on you because it seems very easy at first, and we're going to show you some examples of that in the gym of how it's done, because it's easier to see than to explain. But bottom line, muscle rounds is the foundation to our program, and it will get you where you want to go faster than any other way. This program is easy to implement, but it takes focus to perform.
Okay, now what we're going to show you now is how to perform a muscle round. The idea behind this is to do 4 repetitions, then we're going to rack the weight back to the rack, rest 10 seconds, perform another 4 repetitions, rack the weight back, rest 10 seconds. We're going to do that 6 different times. Do 4 sets of that, 6 rounds. That's what we're calling that. Now, typically what you want to do here is you want to pick a weight initially that you can do 8 to 10 reps on. Now, with Kirk here, he can probably do a lot more weight than we're doing right now, but just for demonstration purposes, we want to show you this with a little lighter weight. Okay, so we're going to get started. Okay, Kirk. 4 reps. We want to make sure that your form is good, not loose. Good. He's going to rack it. You're going to rest 10 seconds. Now, it's important that in this particular round, you might have a partner that helps you so they can time you to let you know when it's time to do the next set. Okay, Kurt, you're on again. Good. Good. Rack it. Muscle rounds will be very deceiving. Because of the fact you're doing 4 reps, you don't think that this is going to be that hard of an exercise. As you're going into the rounds, it's going to get a lot tougher. Okay, Kirk, you're on again. This is round number 3. Good. 10 seconds. Very important that you stay on task with this. I would suggest at about the 8-second mark, you start getting yourself ready. Okay, this is muscle round number 4. Okay. Good. This is round number 5. Good. Really important that you stay focused. Don't let your mind wander too much, because before you know it, you're back on for set number 6. Here we go, round 6. Here we go. Good. Now that's what we consider one set of a muscle round. Again, as I said, this is a very deceptive type of exercise. The fact that you're doing 4 reps, you think that this is going to be an easy thing to do. But in fact, after you get all 6 rounds in and we're doing 4 sets of that, it's going to fool you. One of the things that this does by doing the 4 repetitions, it allows your muscles to clear the lactic acid. And basically what we want to do here is to take your body further into doing more volume. After 8 weeks on Titan training, we will now switch over to a planned specialization routine. This is a 3-week training program. This is like taking an elective class in high school or college. This is a good time now for you to start bringing up lagging body parts. You will see that we're going to have a specialization routine set up for you in Titan training, but feel free at this point to go ahead and experiment. Do exercises maybe that you haven't covered in our course. After you do the 3-week program, you'll take a 1-week rest and then return back to the original program.
Okay, let's put this all together now. In the Titan training system, you're going to be dealing with the 3 components: base training, volume training, and muscle rounds. Now, how we fit these together is important. Base training is your strength foundation. Volume training is your muscular endurance foundation. We combine those in one workout. Half the body is trained in base training. The other half of the body is trained in volume training. The next day, it's switched. The half that was trained with volume is now trained with base. The other half is now trained with volume. So what happens? In a 2-day period, you have a full body workout twice. Once with volume, once with base. There is a 1-day rest after that. The next day, training session 3, half the body is going to be trained with muscle rounds, which is the key to muscle growth. The next training session, day 4, the other half of the body is going to be trained with muscle rounds. So what happens? In a 1-week period, each muscle is trained for strength, muscular endurance, these are the foundation, and then finished off with muscle rounds. Then there's a 2-day rest after that. Now, typically we show in the training program a Monday, Tuesday, rest, Thursday, Friday routine. But you can move this around. You could do Tuesday, Wednesday, rest on Thursday, and Friday and Saturday, however you want to work it. But you have to have a day rest between training session 1 and 2, and you have to have a 2-day rest after training session 4. These cannot change. After those 8 weeks, again, we go to the specialization program, as Leo outlined, and this is your elective class. The purpose of this is really just to shock your body, because we found, even with this system, that after a while your body becomes too adapted to it. You have to continually shock it. And we call it a planned specialization, because if you wait till you hit a plateau and then you do something to shock your body, it's too late. Because remember, we don't want plateaus. We want MPR, maximum physiological rate. So we want to shock the body typically before any plateau ever occurs, so that you're constantly growing. And then you take your rest. And I do mean rest. This is a time to take yourself completely away from the gym. Do something different. A lot of people, what they'll do is they'll actually plan their vacations for that 1 week rest and then work backwards to the start of their system. But you need some time off. The body needs a time off to rejuvenate, especially on a program like this, because it will tax you. Raphael is going to show you another example of muscle rounds. In this case, we're going to be using the seated military press. And we're going to be using a little bit more substantial weight so you can get a real feel of how a muscle round would look with substantial weight. Okay, let's begin. He's going to do 4 repetitions. And he's going to rest 10 seconds, which is going to seem like 5 seconds after about the second or third round. Okay, let's go. It's up to the partner to help push him and keep him on pace. There's going to be a tendency to want to rest 12 seconds and then rest 15 seconds. And pretty soon it's not a muscle round, it's something else. Okay, let's go. Stay tight. Now it's sneaking up on him. Muscle rounds are extremely powerful. Even though you're getting lactic acid clearance, you're not getting full recovery, you're just getting partial recovery. Let's go. Okay.
You're definitely faster there.
I got it. Okay, notice how he's decreasing the range of motion. He's doing more of a partial, which is okay. It's a way of keeping the set going. Let's go. And maintaining the exercise. Okay, now he actually completed 3 reps as opposed to 4. That's okay. This is how this is going to work. It gets to the point where you may not be able to do all 4 repetitions. One more time. Let's go, let's go, let's go. No rest. Let's go, let's do it, let's do it. Okay. Okay. This is an excellent example of many facets of the life of a set. As you noticed, that at the last round, he was not able to complete the last rep that he attempted. And we actually did a forced rep, which again, we don't recommend that as a base way of training. What happens is, in real life, you're gonna get a point where you just can't get it out. You think you got it and you don't. That's okay. That's what the spotter's there for. That's giving you a forced rep. If every time he did a set or a round, in his mind, he was not going to end until failure, that's where the failure cycle begins. That's not what we want. Now, did he get 4 reps for every single round? No, but that's his goal. That's what he's achieving. What you saw is how it really looks in the gym. He's pushing himself. He's a very strong individual, but these muscle rounds will really sneak up on you and get you before you even know it. Now, a point to note, Raphael did all 6 rounds. He was not able to achieve 4 reps, and that's okay. what typically will happen is if you get to a point where the weight gets so heavy that you're not ever able to complete all 6 rounds, then you may want to consider backing off the weight a little bit. In this case, this was okay because normally he could do 6 rounds. It was just at this particular time he exhausted himself. But he's on that edge. He was very, very close. I would recommend in this case lowering the weight. I would recommend in this case continue with the same weight until he can get 4 reps for all 6 rounds. If he was starting to fail on the 3rd or 4th round, that's when you say, okay, I better back off the weight, make sure I can get all the rounds complete before going to the next. Remember, this is part science, part art. Muscles can't read. They can't read your workout program. You have to go in the gym, apply yourself, and you have to be willing to live in that gray area. Good job, Rafael.
Thank you. Trust me, these muscle rounds really sneak up on you.
Okay, let's delineate between tactics and strategies. There's a difference, and that difference is important. A strategy is your overall game plan. The Titan training program is a strategy. A tactic are some of the tools and techniques that you use to achieve that strategy. One tactic is what we call set extension techniques. And I want to cover this because sometimes set extension techniques are confused as a strategy. A set extension technique basically are ways to increase volume or intensity in any given set. So let's start with demonstrating some basic set extension techniques. Why don't you go ahead and do some barbell curls. Now he's going to do curls, and now he can do a lot more weight than this, but we're using this as a demonstration practice. Now, at some point, he's going to reach momentary muscular exhaustion, meaning he's done his last full rep that he's able to do. So let's assume that's his last full rep. Now, at this point, he can increase the intensity and volume of the set by doing going to failure, which is doing some, all the way up to the point where he can't do any more. He's failed that set. He has not done a complete repetition. He's gone to failure. Another tactic we can use once failure is reached is to come over here, and I'm going to actually give him forced reps, which is going to allow him to get a few more reps. Another process we can use is, let's say after failure, what I'll do is I'll bring the bar up for him, and then he'll slowly let it down. These are called negatives. We may do one or two of these. Another technique he can use is partials, where he just does several partial reps somewhere in the range of motion of the exercise. It could be in the middle range, the bottom range, the top range, depending on whatever strategy that he has. Another process he can use is called statics, where let's say I give him a negative, and he holds it in one position as long as he can. Those are called statics. Okay, very good. Now, another set extension technique are called supersets, and that's where immediately after doing one set of barbell curls, he walks over and let's say he does some dumbbell curls or some underhand chins. It's combining two sets that are attacking the same target muscle, and you go from one set immediately to the other. That's a superset. Now you can actually do 3 of those supersets. You can do barbell curls, underhand chin-ups, and then go and do dumbbell curls. So you're actually doing 3. Those are called, many call them giant sets. Now a compound set is different. A compound set is where you combine 2 sets together, but they're targeting different muscles. So you would do barbell curls and then immediately go to tricep pushdowns or calf raises or some other exercise that's not targeting the other muscle. And there'd be no rest, but there'd be no rest in between those 2 exercises. This increases training frequency. Okay, now that I've shown you some of the more popular set extension techniques, I'm going to tell you which ones are good and which ones aren't. We never recommend, as a practice, going to failure. Why? Because Going to failure creates a failure cycle. It's okay to go to momentary muscular exhaustion. Go until you've done one full rep or the last full rep that you possibly can. But what happens is when you start going to failure, meaning every set you do, you end up in failure, your failure threshold starts to lower. It's been very popular, especially in the 80s, mid-80s to mid-90s. But what was happening was you set a set point in your brain now so that you know that you cannot finish that set until you go to failure. So you fail sooner. You want to end a set with success. Does that mean that you never fail a set? Absolutely not. There are going to be times when you think that you can get one more rep, but you can't. But if you create a success cycle where you always go for that last rep, you will tend to fail less, and you're going to get kind of a feel of when that last rep is. Another set extension technique that we never recommend is negatives. Now, the problem with negatives is for a while the Russians were experimenting with it, and so the idea is anything that anybody experiments with, especially in the Eastern Bloc, and they do come with some very advanced ideas. Many of the ideas that we use were developed by the Russians, East Germans, and Bulgarians. But when they were experimenting with negatives, we picked the ball and ran with it. Now here's a problem. Negatives do cause a lot of soreness. Remember earlier we talked about soreness is not a gauge one way or another of recovery or non-recovery. Also, soreness is not always a gauge of if it's an effective exercise. You see, the way the muscle contracts is you have actin and myosin fibers that kind of ratchet on each other. And this creates the muscle to shorten, causing a contraction, the joint moves, and you have an exercise movement. Now when you do negatives, what you're doing is you're stripping that ratchet. You're actually tearing the ratcheting mechanism of the actin and myosin. So of course you're going to cause soreness, but the soreness is from muscle damage, not muscle stress. That's not what we want. Negatives don't work. You get plenty of negative exercise from controlling the weight down, not to have to add artificial negatives into it. Okay, well let's kind of go through a quick evaluation of these set extension techniques. And let's talk about the good ones, the ones that we recommend. Going to momentary exhaustion, excellent. Especially for training, base training. You typically wouldn't use momentary exhaustion when you're in volume training. There you're training at about 80%. What's more important is speed, going from one exercise to the other, building the cardiovascular reserves, building the tolerance to lactic acid. Partials are excellent. Statics are okay. All of those are just ways of increasing the intensity of the exercise. Supersets are fine. We do a lot of that when we do specialization programs. Compound sets, going from one exercise immediately to another where we're hitting two different target muscles, is an excellent way of increasing workout efficiency, workout volume, getting a lot of volume of training in a short period of time, which is what we utilize when we do volume training. Another very good set extension techniques are called stripping the bar, tear downs, descending sets, running the rack. What it means is you do a set for as many reps as you can, and then you put the weight down like the dumbbell and grab a lighter dumbbell and do more reps. And then again, when you can't do any more reps with that barbell or dumbbell, then you set it down and you grab a lighter one. Now on barbells, it's going to be a little bit different. You're going to have to strip off the weight. That's why they call them bar strip downs. The point here is, again, you're increasing the volume of the set. Let me demonstrate. Now he's going to get as many reps as he can, and then when he's done, he's going to set the dumbbells down, grab another weight, and try to crank out 3 or 4 more reps with it. Now, can you see where this is a lot better of an alternative than going to failure? Because when you go to failure, again, you're creating a failure cycle. In this case, you're still able to succeed in each set, and you're still able to extend the set for more repetitions, but you are creating a success cycle as opposed to a failure cycle. Okay, I think we've given you a fairly good overview of the most common and, in our estimation, the most effective set extension techniques, and also warn you about the ones that we think aren't effective and in fact could be dangerous. Now, what's important to remember is that these are tactics. They're not strategies. So many times, like I said earlier, we get confused between a tactic and a strategy. Doing forced reps, or doing negatives, or doing partial training, or doing static training. These are tactics. It's not a strategy. It is not a map. But many of these can be effective as part of your overall strategy. Now, in the Titan training system, when you're doing base training and when you're doing muscle rounds, you're not going to be using or utilizing a lot of these set extension techniques. Now, obviously, in the volume training, you're going to be using a lot of compound sets. And in fact, I failed to mention in compound sets, you can actually, again, like giant sets, you can add 2, 3, even 4 compound sets together, as long as they're all targeting different muscles. But again, these are all tactics that you use to implement in a strategy. Earlier, in exercise selection, we told you that we were going to go over a system for evaluating any exercise to give you a rough idea of how effective it's going to be in building size and or strength. The system we use to classify exercises is called neuromuscular activation, or NMA for short. Now, NMA has 7 levels. We look at any exercise and we determine at what level NMA this exercise is. Once we determine the NMA level, we can then decide how we want to implement it into, and if we want to implement it into our training program. We typically want to keep higher NMA exercises in the core of our training. Now, this does not mean that lower NMA exercises are off limits. They all have their place, but you need a way of rating which exercise is going to be best for you for building mass and strength. NMA relates to the nervous system and how well a muscle is activated by the nervous system. You see, the nerve energy is essential to muscle strength and growth. Any neurologist will tell you that when a person loses nerve flow, or even a diminished nerve flow to a muscle, that muscle will atrophy. And even if you rehab it and try to strengthen it, if the nerve flow isn't good, you're not going to get results. You can train forever, but if nerve flow is down, you're not going to get the results you want. Now, when we look at an exercise, we look at how well it stimulates the nervous system, thus the term NMA. We're going to look at 7 classifications. Level 1 involves isolation exercises using variable resistance machines. These typically have lots of pads and chains, and there's usually nothing to grip. The concept here is the idea of trying to isolate a muscle and to take as much other synergistic work from other muscles out of the whole exercise. A good example would be a cam-driven curl machine, where you don't actually grab the bar, but the pads are against your wrist. Now, this is where theory seems great, but practicality is not so great. What happens with level 1 exercises is 2 things are working against you. One is isolating a muscle is not as effective for building size and strength as training multiple muscles at one time, what we call compound exercises. Isolating a muscle can be effective for exercise rehab, for an injury, or as an adjunct to a training program. But look at your big strength and size builders, your bench press, your squat, your bent over rows. They work a lot of muscles. Our muscles were all designed to work in synergy and to be used all together. There's nothing in life, in our typical environment, that isolates a certain muscle. You're not going to find that anywhere. other than a highly sophisticated, very expensive machine. On top of that, they use variable resistance. Now, again, variable resistance has its place. As far as being a core exercise for building size and strength, it just won't happen. The theory behind variable resistance is that you change the resistance of an exercise through the arc of range of motion. An example would be a bicep curl, where the machine will, because of the cam, will decrease resistance at the very beginning of the curl where you're weaker, increase resistance at the mid-range of the curl where you're stronger, and then decrease it at the top of the curl where you're typically weaker. In theory, this seems like a neat idea, but in reality, our muscles were not designed to work against the cam. The idea that somehow by matching the resistance to our strength arc is somehow going to create better results just doesn't happen. We need to fit the weight, not the weight have to fit us. That's the way our bodies are designed. For rehab and as an adjunct exercise, they can be excellent. They can create an alternative stimulus to round out our program, but we cannot use these as core exercises. Now, level 2 NMA exercises are compound exercises that use variable resistance or some type of cam. Now, we've taken one step up. We're still using a cam. We're still trying to custom fit the machine to our specific strength arc. But now at least we're not trying to isolate one muscle, which in actuality, I need to add, you can't totally isolate a muscle. But again, we're increasing the amount of muscles that are being brought into play so that our body can marshal more involvement, more nervous system stimulation. A typical example of that would be some type of machine that has a cam that's a bench press or a leg press or a row machine. We're using big muscle groups, compound exercises. We're involving several muscles, but we're still locked into some kind of cam, some type of range of motion arc. Now let's move it up one notch. Let's go to level 3 NMA. Level 3 NMA involves stressing one muscle or a small target area, an isolation exercise, if you will. But we're still using some type of machine because the weight's going to be on some type of track or your range of motion is guided, but we're not using a variable resistance cam. Okay, so now things have changed. We're not trying to have the machine fit us in our strength arc. We're having to fight against it, creating more stress to muscle because the strength curve is pretty much dictated by our muscles and our joints and not by the machine. A good example of this would be curls on a Smith bar machine. You're guided by some type of track, but you are not using any type of variable resistance component. Cable work on a isolation muscle is considered level 3. Level 4 NMA exercises involves compound exercises using some type of machine that does not have a variable resistance cam. So let's take the Smith machine, for example. You can do bent over rows or bench press or military press. There's no cam there guiding your strength curve, but you are still on a track, but you are using compound movements. Another way of looking at a compound movement as opposed to an isolation movement, typically a compound movement will cross 2 joints, whereas an isolation exercise will typically involve 1 joint. Moving into level 5 NMA, now we're getting into some core movements. Level 5 NMA involves using free weight to do isolation exercises. This would include the barbell curl, the dumbbell lateral raise, the French press. We're using free weight to try to isolate a muscle. But you know, we're not really isolating that muscle because we're in a 3-dimensional space. There's no tracks guiding our movement. So the body is truly activated and it typically is more effective than some type of machine where you're in where there's a lot of drag and you're being guided, your movement's being guided, which is not natural. Our muscles weren't designed to operate that way. Now, you probably already guessed, level 6 NMA is where we're using free weight and we're focusing on compound exercises. We're doing the big movements, the squat, the bent over row. These are movements that involve several muscle groups. They're very efficient for hitting a lot of areas in a short period of time, and they require mental focus and balance. Your nervous system is on high alert when you do this. Think about doing a squat with heavy weight as opposed to doing a leg extension. Now, the leg extension can sometimes burn a lot more, but you are much more focused. You are almost have a fear factor many times when you're under a heavy squat bar. This is important. This is nervous activation. Everything's on alert. Level 7. This is the top of the NMA chart. This involves moving your body through space, or moving your torso through space. It's easier to describe examples than to try to define it. And level 7 NMA, moving body through space, would be a chin-up or pull-up as compared to a lat bar pull-down. Why? Because a lat bar pull-down, you're moving your limbs through space. A chin-up or pull-up, you're moving your torso through space. This is why a squat, moving body through space, tends to always be more effective than a leg press, even though the movements are identical. This is why weighted dips can be tremendously effective for building your chest and triceps. Okay, we've covered the 7 levels of neuromuscular activation, but you know, I'm not going to make it that easy for you, because even though we've given you a way to classify exercises, there's going to be a lot of you think, okay, all I'm going to do is focus on level 7 stuff. I'm not going to do anything from a level 4 or 3 or 2 or 1. And that's not the way it works. What you need to do is you need to keep your core group, which will tend to be about 70% of your team, within the top 3 levels. But supplementing those levels with lower levels is quite effective and actually can be superior by combination. And let me give you some examples of that. Does that mean that an exercise that is classified as level 6 is not as good as level 7? Not always. Look at the bench press or the incline bench press. Extremely effective exercise for building the chest. Now, a true NMA way of doing that, to reach the highest level, would be a push-up. But try to create a lot of resistance on the push-up, and we've tried that. It's too awkward. It just doesn't have the same feel. It doesn't work as well as a bench press. So in this case, a level 6 is probably more effective than a level 7. The point here is these are just kind of general guidelines or lines, but the lines can be blurred. There's sometimes an exercise like a leg press is going to be superior to a squat. You're having some low back pain, some low back problems, or maybe you're having some knee problems or ankle problems, and you find a leg press machine that doesn't aggravate those injuries. Just variety alone. Sometimes when you're traveling to exhaustion, it's very difficult on big movements to do that. Where if you drop down an NMA, you can go to complete momentary muscular exhaustion. Also, when you're dealing with speed, when you're dealing with volume training, when you need to move quickly from one exercise to another and hit as many angles as you can to really shock the muscles, it's much easier to use machines with guided tracks because they're safer and they're easier to set up and you don't have to be racking and unracking. So my point is, use NMA as a rough guide. It'll give you a tool, but you still got to use your head. And I want you to, just like we move through reps and weight, you're going to be moving a little bit through the NMA range, but always with a focus towards the higher end, because that's where the action is. Okay, there you have it. You now have the map to your ultimate destination, MPR.
There's one goal that you have to have in mind. Pin your ears back, go to the gym, know what your objective is, and reach your goal.